Picture this. You are running. The air burns in your lungs, each breath a shard of glass. Behind you, there are shouts, the harsh, grating sounds of men who believe they own the world and everything in it. Before you, the land stretches out, a merciless expanse of rock and dust under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Your home, the only one you have ever known, is a memory of smoke and fear. They came at dawn, armed with a piece of paper and the cold arrogance that comes with power. A so-called deed, signed by a governor you've never seen, claiming the river, the trees, the very ground your ancestors are buried in. They said it was the law. But you know the law of this land is written in the stars and the seasons, not on a forged document held in the fist of a greedy man. You are clutching a smooth, heavy stone in your hand, its surface carved with symbols that tell the true story of your people. It is the only real deed that matters, a testament of belonging that predates their forts and their fences. It is your past and your future, and you are its last guardian. Every muscle screams for you to stop, to surrender to the crushing exhaustion. But you cannot. To stop is to let everything your people have ever been turned to ash. So you run. You run until the sun bleeds across the horizon and the world dissolves into a terrifying darkness, with only the howls of coyotes for company. You stumble into a ravine, the unforgiving ground rising up to meet you, and as your vision blurs, you have to ask yourself, when you are the last light standing against an encroaching darkness, how long can one person possibly hold out before they are extinguished forever? Nita's world had shrunk to the rhythm of her own ragged breathing and the frantic beat of her heart against her ribs. The high desert air, thin and cold, offered no comfort. It was an accomplice to the emptiness that now surrounded her. Hours ago, there had been the warmth of the lodge, the smell of cedar smoke, the familiar laughter of her younger brother. Now, there was only the vast, indifferent silence of the wilderness and the ghost of Mayor Thorne's voice, smooth as polished stone and just as cold, declaring her home, her life, forfeit. His men had been rough, their faces pinched with a casual cruelty as they herded her family away from their ancestral lands by the river. They called it a relocation, a lawful eviction. Nita called it what it was, a theft of the soul. She had managed to slip away in the chaos, grabbing the covenant stone from its hallowed place before plunging into the thicket of pinyon and juniper. Now she was a fugitive in her own land. A storm was gathering in the west, the clouds piling up like mountains of dark slate. The wind picked up, a low moan that seemed to echo the sorrow in her own spirit. It whipped her long black hair across her face and tore at her thin tunic. A flash of lightning illuminated a jagged ridgeline in the distance, followed by a low growl of thunder that vibrated through the soles of her worn moccasins. The storm inside her was just as fierce. Despair was a cold tide, threatening to pull her under. She was alone, hunted, and the weight of her people's legacy felt impossibly heavy in her small hands. She stumbled over a loose rock, her ankle twisting with a sharp, searing pain. Nita cried out, collapsing onto the dusty ground as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. They struck the parched earth around her, each one a dark, spreading stain. She stared at them, her vision blurring with tears of exhaustion and pain. This was it. This was where her strength finally gave out. She had run as far as she could. She curled into herself, clutching the stone to her chest, and prepared to let the storm take her. But fate, it seemed, was not yet finished with her. Through the growing downpour, a faint, flickering light pricked the darkness. A light where no light should be. Hope, a dangerous and fragile thing, fluttered in her chest. Using a sturdy branch of sagebrush as a crutch, she pulled herself to her feet, her ankle screaming in protest. She limped towards the light, a tiny beacon in a world that had gone entirely black. The light led her to a small, isolated cabin tucked into a narrow valley, sheltered by ancient cottonwoods. It was a place of solitude, built by hands that wanted to keep the world at bay. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a fragile ribbon against the tempestuous sky. She reached the porch just as her strength failed her completely, her hand barely grazing the rough-hewn wood of the door before she slumped to the ground, the rain washing over her in cold sheets. The door creaked open. A tall figure filled the frame, silhouetted against the warm lantern light from within. He was a broad-shouldered man, his face a landscape of harsh lines and shadows, made all the more severe by a pale scar that ran from the corner of his left eye down to his jawline. His eyes, however, were not hard. They were the color of a stormy sea, and in their depths, she saw a flicker of something she recognized. A deep, abiding weariness. This was a man who knew loss. He said nothing, simply looked down at her, a crumpled figure of desperation on his doorstep. For a long moment, the only sounds were the drumming of the rain and her own labored breaths. Then, without a word, he knelt, his movements slow and deliberate. He gently lifted her into his arms, his strength surprising. He carried her inside as if she weighed nothing at all, kicking the door shut against the raging storm and the darkness he had so clearly built this refuge to escape. His name was Silas. He did not ask for hers. He laid her gently on a simple cot near the hearth, the fire casting dancing shadows across the log walls. He moved with a quiet efficiency, fetching a basin of warm water and clean cloths. He tended to her twisted ankle with a practiced gentleness, his large, calloused hands surprisingly deft as he wrapped it tightly. Nita watched him through a haze of pain and suspicion. Her whole life, men who looked like him, white men with stony faces and an air of ownership, had brought nothing but ruin. Yet this one was different. He didn't speak, didn't demand answers. He simply acted, his presence a shield against the fury of the storm outside. He left a bowl of warm broth on a small stool beside her and retreated to a chair in the corner of the room, where he began cleaning a rifle, the rhythmic click and slide of metal a strangely soothing sound. The cabin was a testament to a solitary life. A single bed, a small table, shelves lined with preserved goods and well-worn books. There were no pictures, no mementos of another life. It was a fortress of self-imposed exile. For 3 days, Nita did not speak. She drifted in and out of a feverish sleep, her dreams haunted by the faces of her family and the cold smile of Mayor Thorne. Each time she woke, Silas was there, either stoking the fire, mending a piece of tack, or simply sitting in his chair, a silent, watchful guardian. He never intruded, never pushed. He would leave food and fresh water by her cot and then retreat, giving her the space she desperately needed to piece together the shattered fragments of her world. On the 4th morning, she woke to find the storm had passed. Sunlight streamed through the single window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The world outside was washed clean, glistening and green. Her ankle was still sore, but the swelling had gone down. She sat up and saw Silas by the open door, looking out at the valley. He had a tin cup of coffee in his hand, and the morning light softened the harsh lines of his face. She found her voice, a hoarse whisper. "Thank you," he turned, his gaze meeting hers. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a quiet acknowledgement. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "You were in a bad way that evening." They shared a meal of roasted rabbit and wild roots in a comfortable silence. The silence was different now. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but the quiet understanding of two people who had weathered the same storm, albeit in different ways. Weeks melted into a month. A routine, gentle and unspoken, formed between them. Nita began to heal not just her body, but her spirit. She would help Silas in his small garden, her knowledge of the earth a quiet gift. She showed him which plants were for healing and which were for sustenance, her fingers tracing the leaves as she spoke their names in her native tongue. He listened, his focus absolute. In turn, he taught her the ways of his solitude. He showed her how to track deer, how to read the clouds for signs of changing weather, how to mend a fence post with sturdy, efficient knots. He spoke little of his past, and she did not ask. His history was etched into the lines on his face and the permanent sadness in his eyes. Her own story was a constant, aching presence, embodied by the covenant stone, which she now kept wrapped in a piece of buckskin beside her cot. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the flames painting their faces in flickering gold, Nita finally unwrapped the stone. "This is why they want our land," she said, her voice soft but clear. She held it out for him to see. The carvings were ancient, depicting a river, a mountain, and the figures of her people, all under a benevolent sun. "It is our story. Proves we have always been here. Mayor Thorne's paper is a lie, written in ink. This is the truth, written in stone." Silas looked at the stone, his expression unreadable. He did not touch it, but his gaze was reverent. "A man who needs paper to prove he owns something," he said, his voice a low rumble, "never truly owns it at all." He then looked into the fire, his eyes distant, as if seeing a past he had long tried to bury. "I knew a man like that once, a cattle baron named Blackwood. He wanted my land, the small ranch I'd built with my wife, Sarah." It was the first time he had spoken a name from his past. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. "He said I was blocking his access to the creek. Offered to buy me out for pennies. I refused. My Sarah, she loved that place. Our boy was born there." He touched the scar on his face, an unconscious gesture of pain. "One night we woke up to the smell of smoke. The barn was on fire. Blackwood's men. I went out to fight them. When I turned back, the house was burning too." His voice cracked, the stoic cowboy's armor falling away to reveal the broken man beneath. "Sarah and my son. They never made it out. I got this," he gestured to his scar, "trying to get back in for them. Blackwood had the sheriff in his pocket. He called it a tragic accident. I came here to disappear. I figured if I was far enough away from other people, I couldn't fail to protect anyone else." Nita reached out and placed her hand on his arm. It was a simple, profound gesture of shared sorrow. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She simply sat with him in his pain, her presence a balm on a wound that had never truly healed. In that moment, the last wall between them crumbled. They were no longer just a man and a woman from different worlds, but two survivors who had found an unexpected sanctuary in each other's company. He was a man who had lost his family to fire, and she was a woman whose family had been stolen by greed. They understood the language of loss perfectly. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sense of purpose. The valley, once Silas's prison of grief, began to feel like a home again. He started to repair the old cradle he had built years ago, his hands sanding the wood smooth not for a ghost, but as an act of reclaiming his own life from the ashes. Nita would sing softly as she worked in the garden, ancient songs of planting and harvest. The music, once silenced by fear, now drifted through the valley, a testament to her resilient spirit. They were building something new here, something fragile and beautiful. A found family, consisting of two souls, a humble cabin, and the enduring hope for a better dawn. But the world of men has long arms, and peace is often just the quiet breath before the storm returns. One afternoon, Silas was checking his snares on the ridge overlooking the valley when he saw it. A lone rider, far in the distance, pausing to survey the land. The man's posture was predatory, his outline sharp and menacing against the setting sun. It was one of Thorne's men. Silas's blood ran cold. He had been found. The sanctuary was about to be breached. He returned to the cabin as dusk fell, his face set in grim lines. He didn't have to say a word. Nita saw the change in him immediately. The peace they had carefully cultivated was gone, replaced by the familiar specter of fear. "They know I'm here," she stated, her voice devoid of question. He nodded, his hand resting on the stock of the rifle he had leaned against the wall. One rider. Scouting the next day they came. Mayor Thorne did not ride with a mob. He was too clever for that. He arrived in a polished buggy, flanked by the town sheriff and two deputies. He was a man who preferred the veneer of law to the messiness of open violence. He stepped down from the buggy, a charismatic smile plastered on his face, but his eyes were like chips of ice. They swept over the small cabin, the neat garden, and finally, they settled on Nita, who stood on the porch with Silas beside her. "Miss Swiftwater," Thorne began, his voice smooth and condescending. "I am relieved to see you are safe. We were all so worried when you ran off." Silas stepped forward slightly, a silent, immovable wall. She's not going anywhere with you. Thorn's smile tightened. He turned his attention to Silas, looking him up and down with disdain. And you are? A squatter, I presume. This land, including this little valley, is part of the territory deeded to the township for expansion. You are both trespassing. He produced a rolled-up document from his coat, the same fraudulent paper he had shown Nita's people. This is a legal matter. The girl is a ward of the town until her people are settled in their new location. She is also in possession of a stolen artifact. Hand her over, and the stone, and I'll overlook your part in this. Nita's heart hammered against her ribs. She had stood up to this man before, but then she had been fueled by the adrenaline of escape. Now, in the quiet of the valley, the sheer force of his corrupt authority felt suffocating. Her hands trembled, but she forced her chin up. This land has never belonged to you, she said, her voice shaking but defiant. And I will not surrender my people's history to a thief. Thorn's facade finally cracked. A flash of fury crossed his face. You will regret that choice, he hissed. Sheriff, I want these two arrested. The sheriff, a portly man with a nervous sweat on his brow, hesitated. He looked at Silas, at the quiet lethality in his stance, and then back at the mayor. Now, Mayor, he stammered, maybe we can talk this through. There is nothing to talk about, Thorn snapped. He pointed a finger at Nita. I will be back, and when I return, I will have the full backing of the territorial court. You cannot hide from the law with that. He climbed back into his buggy and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy silence in his wake. The moment they were gone, the strength Nita had been clinging to dissolved. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ragged sound of utter despair. She had brought this trouble to Silas's door. She had shattered his peace. The weight of it all, the loss of her home, the fear for her family, the imminent threat to the one person who had shown her kindness, was too much to bear. She turned and fled back into the cabin, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with the force of her grief. Silas found her huddled on the cot, her face buried in her hands, the covenant stone on the floor beside her. She was trying to stifle her cries, to maintain the brave front she had held for so long. He knelt in front of her, his presence filling the small space. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, then leaned into his touch. I'm sorry, she wept. I have endangered you. You should have left me in the storm. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he used his other hand to gently tilt her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were filled with a fierce, protective light she had never seen before. His voice was low and impossibly gentle. Nita, he whispered, his thumb stroking her cheek. You don't have to be brave with me. The words broke through her last defense. The dam of her restraint burst, and she wept freely, all the fear and sorrow and rage pouring out of her. He didn't shush her or try to offer platitudes. He simply held her, his strong arms a shelter, letting her release the burden she had carried alone for so long. He let her be vulnerable, and in that vulnerability, she found a new kind of strength. When her tears finally subsided, he was still there, a steadfast anchor in her turbulent world. He looked at her, his expression resolute. I spent years running from men like Thorn, he said, his voice hard as iron. I let one of them burn my world to the ground. I won't make that mistake again. This isn't just your fight anymore. It's ours. A plan began to form, a desperate gambit against a powerful enemy. They couldn't stay here. Thorn would be back, and next time, he would bring enough force to overwhelm them. But they wouldn't run, not anymore. The next town over, a 2-day ride through the canyons, had a federal marshal, a man not on Thorn's payroll. If they could get there, if they could present the Covenant Stone and testify against the mayor, they might have a chance. It was a slim hope, but it was all they had. They would leave at first light. But Thorn was not a patient man. He had no intention of waiting for the slow grind of territorial courts. He wanted the land, and he wanted the satisfaction of crushing the girl who had defied him. That night, as a sliver of moon hung in the inky sky, he returned. This time there was no buggy, no sheriff. There were only a dozen armed men on horseback, their faces grim in the torchlight. They surrounded the cabin, their presence a suffocating ring of menace. Silas, who had been keeping watch, saw them coming. "They're here," he said calmly, already checking his rifle. Nita's blood ran cold, but the time for tears was over. The vulnerability Silas had allowed her had not made her weaker. It had forged her fear into a core of pure steel. She grabbed the Covenant stone, securing it in a leather pouch, and picked up the heavy iron poker from the hearth. They extinguished the lantern, plunging the cabin into darkness. The only light came from the flickering torches outside. Thorne's voice boomed through the night. "Silas, send the girl out, and we'll let you walk away from this." "Not a chance, Thorne," Silas yelled back, positioning himself by the window. "You'll have to come through me." A gunshot shattered the night, splintering the wood of the doorframe. The siege had begun. What followed was a desperate battle of wits and will. Silas was only one man, but he knew the terrain of his self-made prison better than anyone. He moved through the darkness like a phantom, firing his rifle with deadly accuracy from the window, then disappearing to another position before they could pinpoint him. Nita was not idle. She barricaded the door with the heavy table. As Thorne's men tried to ram it down, she used her knowledge of the land. She had gathered puffball mushrooms earlier that day. When dried, their spores were a potent irritant. She threw them into the fireplace, and the smoke billowed up the chimney, carrying the blinding spores into the faces of the men trying to get on the roof. Coughing and sputtering, they scrambled back down. But they were outnumbered. It was a losing fight. The front door began to groan and splinter under the assault of a makeshift battering ram. A torch was thrown onto the roof, and the dry shingles began to smolder. Fire. Silas saw the flames, and for a horrifying second, he was frozen, the memory of his past roaring back to consume him. He saw Sarah's face, heard his son's cry. Nita saw the terror in his eyes. She grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Silas, look at me. We are not them. This is not that night. We are still here. We are still fighting." Her voice cut through his paralysis. He looked at her fierce, unwavering resolve, and the ghosts of the past receded. He was not the man who had failed. He was the man who would not fail again. Just as the door burst open, a new sound cut through the chaos. A war cry from the ridges above the valley, followed by the thunder of hoofbeats. And then more gunshots, but these were not aimed at the cabin. They were aimed at Thorne's men. From the west, a small group of riders descended. It was Nita's brother and a handful of warriors from her tribe, who had been searching for her relentlessly. And from the east, the town blacksmith, a man Silas had once helped pull from a blizzard, arrived with 2 other ranchers who were tired of Thorne's bullying. They weren't an army, but they were a community, a found family, forged in the fires of adversity. Thorne's hired guns, cowards at heart, were caught completely by surprise, trapped in a pincer movement. The fight turned. Just as the chaos reached its peak, a new party of riders arrived, their badges glinting in the firelight. The federal marshal, alerted by the blacksmith's son who had ridden ahead like the wind, had arrived with a posse of deputies. "Drop your weapons. In the name of the law," the marshal's voice boomed, cutting through the din. The fight was over. Thorne, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, was arrested. His forged deed was exposed as a lie when held against the irrefutable, ancient truth of the Covenant stone. The testimony of Nita, Silas, and the townspeople who had stood with them sealed his fate. In the quiet aftermath, as the sun began to rise, the valley was filled not with the stench of smoke, but with the scent of dew and damp earth. Nita's people were safe. The land was theirs once more. Silas stood beside her on the porch, watching the marshal lead Thorne away in chains. The fire on the roof had been extinguished, leaving only a small, charred patch. It wasn't a scar of loss, but a mark of survival. He was no longer a man in hiding. He had found something worth fighting for, something to protect. A home. Family. He looked at Nita, her face illuminated by the dawn of a new day, and he knew his exile was finally over. Have you ever felt like you were the last one standing? Pushed to the very edge with the whole world telling you to give up? Nita's story reminds us that even in our darkest hour, we are stronger than we think. And Silas's journey shows us that it's never too late to stop running from our past and to fight for a new future. They found in each other not just a refuge, but the courage to face down the darkness together. They learned that a family isn't always the one you are born into, but the one you build with the people who stand with you when it matters most. So I ask you, who are the people who stand with you? And what truths, written on your heart, are you willing to fight for? If this story of courage, redemption, and the power of a found family resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. Your stories give us strength. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales that remind us of the enduring power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.